Thank you so much for coming back for part two. We're going to start off. I have a couple more questions I could ask, but I'd like to start with your questions.
Can you all actually look at a script before it's shot when you first know the projects and see that there's going to be a ton of editing based on the script? I mean, that it just doesn't work as a story? Or have you come across that situation?
How do you feel about that question, Dan?
That's a rough one, too. If it's only halfway there, then it's really bad on the editing.
Yeah, I mean, like I was telling him before, I've had, like, with Burn Notice, it's so plot-driven that you know the script, for the most part, is going to work. Your job is to get it to time, make the pace work, and then if there are any plot holes or issues with, well, I can't get the bomb to work because of this, add ADR and you make it work. So there's not a lot of script deviation. But I've had features where you read the script and you're like, well, this obviously isn't going to work. But you can see that the pieces are there. So, like, for example, the one I was telling him about, I had an independent feature where it was all written chronologically over the course of like 7 years as the life of like this teenage girl. And it was dry and boring and it didn't work at all. But I ended up restructuring the entire film in my first cut, and I gave them 2 first cuts. So it was like, here's the one you wrote, here's the one where it's a completely different film where it's like the first scene was scene 40, then it was scene 20, then it was scene 19, then it was scene 147, and they saw both versions. We ended up moving forward with the restructured version, but like he said, as soon as I read the first draft, I'm like, yeah, this is gonna require a tremendous amount of rewriting, but I knew the pieces were there, so I jumped onto the project. And because I was extremely poor and I needed to get paid something. But you can definitely see it coming, and it's just a matter of, are the pieces there to make it work, or do they not even have the pieces? And they had the pieces, they just needed to be rewritten.
If you're cutting Gone with the Wind, and you get to that paragraph that says Atlanta burns, you know there's going to be some footage coming in. It's going to happen. That's what I...
My question is going to be about cutting in sequence. I've cut 2 features this year, so I started with all of the footage, so I wasn't having to deal with dailies and so on and so forth. Has anybody else had that kind of experience, and where you kind of let the footage tell you the story? I didn't even look at the scripts in some cases.
If you get a recut gig, you can do that too. That's great. If it's in order and you cut it, that's fantastic. But you know, if you're getting it while they're shooting, it's never going to be in order.
Actually, 3 films that have been handed to me. 2 of them, because just budgetary reasons, they shot the whole thing, then handed it to me when they were done. And then the Chinese film was a recut. So they had cut the whole thing, and then it just didn't work. And I basically did a day 1 recut. And I absolutely cut it chronologically, because when you see it evolve, you get to know the characters much better, and you can make a lot of your editorial decisions earlier than you usually would. Because if you're cutting scene 78 on day 1, you're like, I don't know how this fits into the story as a whole, so you cut a microcosm. You say, well, I'm going to make 78 work, and the 3-act structure of 78 needs to be there, but if you don't have 77 and 79, you're not sure how it all fits together. But if you cut from scene 1, you start to feel like your scenes are informing other scenes, which is kind of doing 2 jobs at once, which is getting the scene right, but then getting the film right. So it definitely made the process go faster, and I was actually able to cut it faster than the amount of days that they shot, because I was just constantly cutting, as opposed to some days where you're like, well, I only got half the footage for the scene, so I have to wait, and so I actually got it done faster.
When you do a first cut on those scenes, they're like their own movies. Like, you give them every bit of like beginning, middle, and end, and all they can be to shine. And then, you know, when you start to get all the other pieces, you go, oh, let's just start there in the middle, and you know, and you don't need all this, and that's what really happens a lot.
So when you're working with a lot of green screen footage, and I've heard stories, it's kind of hard on the actors because they don't really have anything to react to, and maybe sometimes the directors don't get all the angles maybe they should get. How do you approach that scene to try to get it to work together when you don't really have everything there visually?
Well,
sounds like a Dan question to me.
I guess I can take this one.
Yes, you could.
We had some reshoots in Thor here, Dark World. We had some actor availability problems. So we have a scene, and you guys, when you see it, can try to guess which one it would be. But one of the actors was in Hong Kong doing his against green screen. The other was in London. And you know, the whole thing is put together in Manhattan Beach. So they're acting to doubles, and actually turned out quite well. I mean, it's a little bit harder on the actors because get to put themselves in a set. You know, they're in their wardrobe at least. Thank God for that. So they have that, or if it's Iron Man, they're in a little half-suit pajamas, and then we put the uniform on later. But it's part of the thing now. I mean, you know, I was pondering how they did Gravity. You know, have you guys caught it yet? Just wonderful, wonderful movie. And they have all this, you know, people in, you know, weightless form. So I was saying, okay, this is a complete green screen movie, however they achieved it.
It was a lot of rear projection.
Yeah.
That's a lie. No, I don't know how they did it.
It's a wonderful, Chivo, like, you know how all these old technologies, they come back because of the digital projectors are so stable that rear projections come back big time. Especially, you know, for car scenes and things, because who wants to do the green screen if you don't have it? If you happen to have the plates.
Yes, they can project the plates, but you would have had to do the weightlessness with suits and green screen.
The way they did the weightlessness was extremely interesting with these cameras that came from a car assembly line that would allow, they'd put the camera on the end of it and it would be able to swoop in all these directions. So it appeared that they were moving when in fact just the cameras are moving.
The camera's doing the moving.
Yeah, the camera's doing the moving. It was quite interesting.
See, I don't know what I'm talking about.
No.
That's all right.
But you work on so many movies with green screen, though, and I think it's a particular challenge when it's a character, a human being, talking to something that's not there. They have to know where their eye line is. I mean...
Yeah. So everything like that, and I mean, but so much now is definitely done this way in whole scenes and whole movies. Like if you look at 300, the whole movie is green screen. So.
Hi, this question is for Jay. You mentioned Into the Wild, and I wanted to find out what you did to craft Hal Holbrook's performance, because it was such a wonderful performance in that film.
I didn't have to do a lot. You know, Sean wouldn't shoot many takes with him, like 2, 3, and you know, basically what's in there in many cases are first cuts, you know, because he's just so elegant. He's so, you know, and such a sweet man and such a soulful person that, you know, just stay out of his way.
Are there things that you see either from a directorial or cinematography point of view, or even an acting point of view, that you either say, God, I'm so glad they did this when going through the footage, or damn, why are they doing this? Because this is going to make my life so much more difficult.
Yes to both, right?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And so what are they?
I'm always swearing at my footage, but I'm alone in there. No one hears it.
Yeah.
I would say that one of my biggest, it's an analogy that I call shooting a scene with a fire hose, where they just cover it from every angle, and they get every size, but they have no plan, and they're like, well, just make it. It's like the director and the cinematographer have to have a clear vision of how the lens tells the same story that the actors are and that the writing is. And when you just shoot the scene with a fire hose, it's like, yeah, I have all the pieces, but that doesn't mean they're gonna go together. It doesn't mean they're gonna gel seamlessly. So they're like, oh, we got plenty of coverage. It's like, just because you shot a 3-page scene and I have 6 hours of footage, it doesn't mean I have anything to cut. You know, a lot of footage is not coverage. So knowing that there's a difference between coverage and the amount that you shoot, that's very, very important, because your coverage needs to have a singular purpose and it needs to have a vision. It doesn't mean that you want everything cut in camera and you're going to storyboard it and it needs to be perfect. But there needs to be some sense of vision and direction to why something is being shot that tells the story, as opposed to, well, I'm just going to get every angle from every side and then just cut it, because that never works.
What do you swear at in there?
I love the actors, but I'm always swearing at them. No, don't do that. Hold that smile. What are you doing? It's like, because you're trying to do something. You're always kind of dipping, what if this moment is this? And some of it you are trying to put square pegs in round holes, and it's folly, but then sometimes it's exactly what. But so often now, you're repurposing scenes, and the scene was meant to be this, and it was supposed to be this. Now you've changed the story, and now you have to make a scene that's about this, and you get a lot of almost moments, you know. It's almost what I'm looking for, you know, and then you're trying. So,
like one thing we're dealing with a little bit is, some of the actors, because they're reasonably new still, they've been told, well, don't jump each other's lines. So they go from jumping each other's lines to having, like these actors' studio pauses between the lines. And you're kind of thinking, okay, well, now I need to cut every single time because I can't, unless I go to a master, or, don't blank.
Well, yeah, I think that's the problem.
Yeah.
Like, over-directing actors is a huge problem. Like, not letting them find the scene themselves. Then the performances are so manufactured, or the time, like, especially like what I do in comedy, it's like the timing. They have to find that timing. So it's like you can suggest or guide them, but to be like, oh, stop doing that. That's, I think, that's restrictive and bad.
What would be one tip that you know or just learned recently that you wish you knew on some prior project that I wish I knew this, like, for blah?
The biggest thing for me was, I don't know if anybody here knows the editor Alan Bell. He's working on the third Hunger Games right now, and he did 500 Days of Summer. And he kind of opened my eyes to the idea of performance-enhancing visual effects, where before, as an editor, I would look at it and say, well, the footage is what it is, and I can't cut to here because this person's hand is in the wrong place, or they're not looking in the right direction. And it is what it is, and I have to work with what's there. And he opened me up to the idea that you can composite shots, and you can change the location of somebody's eyes or change the way that their hand is, and you're not locked into the footage anymore. And that completely changed my entire perspective of how to cut a scene, because now there's no longer restrictions. There are restrictions as far as, well, it's going to take me 8 hours to composite the shot, so I don't have time. But it's now just a restriction of time as opposed to, well, I can't use it anymore. Now the reaction is, how can I use this? What is it going to take to use this? Because of the 4 takes I have, this performance is the best, but for 4 different reasons, it doesn't work right now, but how can I make it work as opposed to it just doesn't work? And that completely changed the way that I cut. So that was a big tip that I learned.
I think just knowing that if you work long enough on a scene, you can get it to be whatever you want it to be, and not getting frustrated with like the minutia of it. And that's something I always get better at as I go. I don't know if that makes any sense, but just constantly working at it, and like just figuring out like there's a million different ways to do a joke or to make like an emotional moment play or whatever you're trying to achieve, and just kind of having the stamina to keep trying until you get it right.
I want to know if having backgrounds in any other aspects of filmmaking has made your editing even more awesome.
Good question.
I would expand that out to non-filmmaking things that could really help you as an editor. For instance, if you're a musician, if you're a dancer, if you're, things that have timing, things that have thought. As a kid, I was a chess player, and I think that had good ramifications. So I think there's a lot of related skills that can certainly help. And I do think it's good to have a knowledge of what the other guys in the crew are doing before you ignore their plight and just complain about the footage you got.
Yeah, music. I played music growing up, and that was really informative. I also went to film school, and I didn't take any editing classes, so I took the whole directing track, the camera track, I did acting classes. I learned everything else, and I think all of that taught me a lot about editing, about, knowing story and watching performances and all that stuff.
Yeah, I agree with both of them. All the things you do in your life inform it, whether it's music or acting classes, those are directly inform your work as an editor. And just being sort of a literate person and reading a lot is also helpful, just because you feel story structure in other mediums, and that's very helpful. In a novel or in an essay, how people tell stories, even in a newspaper. So there's a certain curiosity that with things that's probably helpful. And I'm curious to a fault, where you get completely fixated on something, and maybe you should be doing your job. But, he was like, I'd rather read this. The New Yorker came today. Wow. So any of the above.
I teach at USC, and what I always tell my students, if you really want to be a really solid editor, learn to write a script. Take a screenwriting class, take several of them, because when you're in the trenches trying to structure something from scratch that doesn't exist, you can't blame anybody for it not working. Because as an editor, you can just say, the script sucks. It's not my fault. But when you're writing the script, you have to learn structure, you have to learn story beats. And I had to write full-length screenplays, and that's where I learned how to be a really great editor, because I understood story structure. So if you want to be a great editor, I say, learn how to write a script.
All right, let's look at one of our Twitter questions. In order to cut creatively, you need good organization. What are qualities you look for in assistant editors?
Organization, I think. That's a really good answer. I think you're really organized, and I'm not very techy, so I like someone who can just fix every problem as quickly as possible. I also just like someone who's really fun and nice to have around because you spend a lot of time with them.
Yeah, somebody you can stand to be in the room with.
Yeah, my assistant's like incredibly positive. So if I come in, I'm in a bad mood, he's like, hey, you know, and he's got a whole other life that he likes to talk about. Sometimes you just want to have a good personality around.
I have female assistants as well as male, and I like to mix it up because I need female eyes on the stuff to tell me stuff, like whisper in my ear, hey, that hair is a real problem. I go, oh yeah, the hair is a real problem. And because there's certain things, you know, I have one long-term assistant that whenever we do a kiss, I bring her in the room and do the cut, and I'll look at her and she'll, I'll make it a little longer. I'll make it a little longer. Okay, I get it. All right.
Yeah, I mean, someone you can stand to be in the room with. That's a big one.
Organization is by far number one for me, but number two is innovation. And I guess what I mean by that is when a director's looking for an editor, they don't want somebody that's going to execute their script and give them exactly what they want. They want somebody that's going to be their own voice and bring their own ideas to the project. And as an assistant, if I'm going to say, hey, I have, you know, like what I'm doing now, I have like 80 angles of, you know, this project, and I don't want to say, well, do this, 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 and this is how I want it organized. What I love is for somebody to say, well, I found a better way to do this. And you're like, why didn't I think of that? So innovation as an assistant is so helpful. And another thing I really look for, like you said, is I like people that are on the way up as opposed to somebody that has been a career assistant for 20 years, because they have a very set way to do things, and it's harder to get them to innovate. But I also want somebody that I can just hand a scene to and say, just cut this for me. And then they can take notes, and they're really passionate about it. So I would rather work with younger people who are super passionate as opposed to somebody that just has been doing it the same way over and over. But by far, number one, organization, right there.
Organization.
Got to be organized. If I can't find stuff,
Terrible.
yeah, no point.
When you're editing a movie that's based on a novel or a comic book in your case, do you read the novel before you start on the project?
It depends. Like, I didn't read the novel of Silver Linings Playbook on purpose because it was already an interpretation, the script. So I said, there's no benefit of reading it. In Into the Wild, I had read the book many times before I read it when it first came out, before Penn even had the rights to it. And John Krakauer was very much involved in the film, so it was like, it was an extension of the script, just in another form.
Now, how does that help you when you're actually putting the movie together?
Well, you're understanding the character and you're understanding the conflicts. And in the case of Into the Wild, there's a lot of supposition about what his behavior was. And so, and only certain people knew him in the particular situations. And in many cases on that film, the Vince Vaughn character is a character named Wayne Westerberg. And Wayne, we got to know him, and he actually worked on the film. And he also provided letters that Chris McCandless had sent to him that he'd never shown anyone before. You were very much respectful of the primary sources where you had them. And John Krakauer, in September, he wrote an article that was actually in the New Yorker about how Chris McCandless died from the eating the plant, which has always been a great cause of speculation. And we, in the film, and sort of with John's blessing, we had said he got confused and ate the wrong plant. And I think John's most recent article came out that, no, he was eating the right plant, that there's just a particular alkaloid in that plant that when you hit a certain concentration of it, it can be toxic. It's an amazing story. So you get somebody like Krakauer who's completely obsessed with it for 25 years, and he's working on your movie, you know, you better read his book. You better know it really well. And then I've gotten to know him a bit. You understand that the wound that he has in his own life is very similar to Christopher McCandless, and that identification for John drove his obsession to telling that story.
Now, what about with comic book characters?
I don't read the source material on any of them, and that's been an advantage for me, and it's an advantage for the film, because the writers have been in it, and the director and producers, and sometimes they get sort of tied with what they're seeing that they miss something. The films have to stand on their own, and so whatever the logic of the scenes we shoot has to stand up on its own. And it certainly really helped Iron Man to not fall back on, well, it's, you know, in the comics it's this or whatever. It was like, no, it has to work as a movie, and it has to work on this. So interesting on Thor, I worked with a junior editor who knew everything about Marvel Comics and knew, oh yeah, those are the two birds that there's like, whoa, dude, okay. So, and it was great. It actually became a nice symbiosis because he could reconnect with the source while I could go, well, that won't work in a story. No one's really looking at who the bird, you know, whatever.
Let's see what our next Twitter question is. When taking over a cut from someone else, how do you approach it? Rewatch dailies, start from scratch?
Yes.
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 Yes and yes.
That's
huh?
easy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you rewatch the dailies and start from scratch.
Well,
you have to.
Here it works like this. For whatever reason, they've decided to go in a different direction. Now, it can be looked at like this. If you go to the doctor and the doctor tells you have terminal cancer, you go to another doctor and, well, there might be a little hope here. And that's a really good thing to hear. So it's a weird gig because you're a hero just stepping in its own way. And then you go through, because, you know, you're not going to make it any worse, generally speaking. So then, you know, you go about it. Yeah, you break it down, but there's the other component of asking the bosses, well, what is it that you're not liking about this right now? And so you're also reading the room. The real art's knowing not what to take the wrecking ball to of the original work, and then precluding that to actually pick out the parts that are really working and enhance the parts that weren't. That's the more hero's journey for the editor on a recut gig.
Sometimes you have to also not listen to what's bothering them, because it's you know, there's the Walter Murch calls it referred pain. You know, your arm hurts, but it's really the shoulders out of alignment. Right. You know, so there's a lot of that. And as you say, sometimes you're just the hero for being there, and sometimes you do make a difference. You know, the difference between success and, you know, real success and okay or whatever, sometimes very, very, not much. You know, they're very small things push it over the line, and that constantly amazes me. And you just, oh, well, if you didn't have that, you probably wouldn't be as successful.
It can be a simple structural problem that they just can't see. But the danger, again, is that people get the gig and they think they have to change everything to earn their stripes, and that's usually not the case. Usually you want to pick out what's good. However, if it turns out that what you're going to put together is basically a radically different film, that may not always be possible. There might be a lot less that you'll retain, but it's good to look in the old editor's bins to see, before they were brought to the place that ended their tenure, where they were themselves.
Yeah, I've been brought on a couple of pilots to fix because the jokes weren't working or whatever. I have to start from scratch in those scenarios, and I always choose the big scenes, like the big funny set pieces. Like I watched this one pilot, and there's this big, huge scene with the whole cast. It was like the big, you know, final act thing, and it wasn't funny, but I could see why it wasn't funny. You know, I'm like, oh, that's not landing. Oh, there's got to be something better there. You know, so, but then I just had to go and start from scratch, watch all the footage, and just do my own cut. And then if that works, and they're liking what I'm bringing, then I'll go do the next biggest scene or whatever, and just kind of, because I think if you can save that stuff, they'll see what they like, and you can kind of, you know, then I would get the assistant working, hey, like this person's good at improvising, maybe try that, or let this breathe, or, but yeah, it's kind of like ICU a little bit. You have to stop the bleeding a little bit in the big scenes.
What about you, Zach? Any interesting experiences that you've had? Or?
My last year has been nothing but actually getting inherited projects. So yeah, the Chinese film was one
right,
where, I mean, not to be disrespectful, but it literally was a matter of I sat down with the director and the producer watching the editor's cut, and hadn't gone to anybody, it was just an editor's cut. And the list of notes was so long and so profound that I said, let's just start over. Like I can't do anything with this. I'm sure everybody here has had the experience where a friend has said, read my script and give me notes. And sometimes you're like, this is pretty good, I've got some notes. And then there are other versions that are so bad, you're like, dude, it's like, okay, because you don't know how to give it notes, because you don't know what to do with it, because it's so profoundly bad, you can't give it notes. And this cut was at that point where it's like, I cannot do anything with this, and I literally hit the delete key. And I had no choice. Like with the notes that I had, they weren't small notes. Like every beat of the film was missed. The style of it was wrong. It just, the editor, it was a Chinese editor that didn't understand an American style. So it was like, literally, there's a language barrier, and film is a language, and it just didn't understand the American language of film. So I literally rewatched all the dailies and just cut from scratch. The second one that I did was the opposite of that, where it was working really well. They just lost their editor and they needed somebody to fix a couple key moments, but otherwise just kind of shepherd them to the end of the process. And that was the opposite, where I was very respectful of the work the editor had done. And unless they specifically said, focus on this, I didn't change anything, even though there were places where I felt the need, like, oh, I could do that or do that. I was very respectful to where the editor had brought it, because they didn't have major problems with it. And the project that I'm on now is kind of in between, where there are sections that work and sections that don't. So I'm starting from scratch on the things that really don't work, and the stuff that really does work I'm not touching, and then there's stuff where it's like, well, I need to finesse it, but I don't need to start from scratch. But up until the beginning of this year, I really had not done any recuts, and now the entire year has been nothing but recuts for me.
Do you have any methods you use to get in a director's head from the start of a project?
If you get footage of the director talking to the people, sometimes it's good to watch, you know, to watch if you're confused. I mean, a lot of times you can just tell from the footage how it evolves, what they want, but sometimes, you know, you'll see them come over, talk to an actor, and I'm like, you know, you listen in and kind of get into the process a little bit.
If you've done something with them, you know them well enough, so you're almost keeping your distance in a certain sense, just so you have some objectivity on what they're doing.
One thing, if I'm working with somebody I haven't worked with before, usually at the interview itself to get the gig, I'll have done a whole lot of notes on the script, and I'll start to ask them how they're going to handle it. And it serves me in two ways. It shows me whether or not that they've thought of these issues themselves and what they're going to do about these things, but it also shows me if they're at all interested in a give and take. So it's kind of like they're interviewing me and I'm kind of interviewing them to see if this will really work, because the one thing I've certainly gotten myself into in my career is the no-win situation. You got the gig for the wrong reasons. Maybe you were forced on somebody, maybe it's just not going to be a good communication, you're not on the same wavelength. You know, we're people that also need a little love, a little feedback to tell us when we're doing things right as well. You know, they're the director, they're supposed to conduct and tell us how to proceed, and so you want that. Now, if you're going towards the iceberg and you can see it and do nothing about it, that is the no-win situation.
Okay, got it.
I mean, a process that I go through, because that's actually something I try to do, is literally, and it's a term that Norman Holland coined, I believe, where you crawl up inside the brain of the director. And what I like to do, even before the interview, is if it's somebody that's established, that has done work before, I watch everything that they've ever done, whether it's music videos, commercials, other features, so I get a really good sense of what their personality is and what their vision is. Because when you watch it all in a marathon, even if they're very different genres, you get a really clear sense of this is what their vision is and this is how they approach it. And then if I get the job, I have a process that I've actually kind of coined. I call myself a method editor. It's kind of like an actor gets into character. I get into the brain of my director and of the genre. So I'll say, tell me everything that you watched as an influence to put this together, and then tell me your 5 favorite films. It doesn't have to do anything to do with the movie, but I want to know what 5 films you like the most. And then piecing those together, I get a sense of their sensibility, what they like, what they don't like, and what their influences were. And then by the first day of dailies, I don't know exactly what they want, but I feel like I know them enough as a person to go in the right direction.
And that usually works for you.
It has so far.
Good.
Yeah,
And if they don't like Lawrence of Arabia and Dr. Strangelove, I don't want to work with them. Okay?
Well, is that your test, Jay?
What Dan says is right, is that when you're interviewing, you're very much deciding if this person's somebody you want to spend a lot of time with. Mm-hmm. And sometimes if you say yes and you're not honest with yourself, you really pay for it.
Yeah, I could see that. I could think of a whole bunch of directors I wouldn't want to spend a lot of time with in a room. Yeah. Okay, we have a real live person again.
I kind of want y'all to talk a little bit more about how you go and prepare for a film that you're going to do, the types of references you look at. You mentioned watching your director's favorite 5 films, that kind of thing, get sensibilities. We can go into a little bit more detail about that, each one of you, and also Zach, if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit more about your process with music, because I also covet my time with that as well.
Aside from what the director likes, what I do is I look at whatever, either the genre of the film or if it's not a genre picture, what kind of direction the film is going, and I'll watch a lot of very successful films that are similar to it, and then I'll watch some films that are similar to it that are really, really bad, that are really unsuccessful, and kind of get a sense of, well, these conventions work, these conventions don't work. And it's kind of like with music, if you listen to the same artist over and over and over, you just intrinsically start to build an internal rhythm that you don't even realize is there. Film is the same way, where every genre and type of film has a different rhythm. One thing that I love about what Dan has said is that he tries not to do the same thing again and tries to stay fresh and do different types of genres. But there's more work that comes with that, because you can't just sit back and be like, oh, I've cut 15 movies like this, so I know everything. Whereas if, like, for example, I went from Burn Notice on a Wednesday to Glee on a Thursday afternoon, like literally in 24 hours, you can't get much more far apart genre-wise, and you just need to immerse yourself into whatever that rhythm is in that genre. And that's, for me, personally, how I prepare for something.
You just sort of read the script and you look at the material, and you have a general life's body of films that you've seen that you like, that you come back to, and somehow I think what you say is quite right, that it's built something into you. Certain projects you shouldn't do. You're the wrong person. You only learn that by doing them and being miserable. I know those, and I certainly don't do those kind, because I don't think I could go look at a bunch of genres about something that I was not particularly sensitive to and learn how. I think I'd do kind of like a mediocre job of that genre, because I think it's all passion. If you don't have the passion for the material you're doing, the sparks don't happen.
When I get a film, one of my first questions isn't to do necessarily story. It's to do with the tone of the picture. And the tone of the picture is how the experience that the audience is going to feel while they're watching it. And it's always the big mystery, because something that if it's going to be good, you have to find it. Ryan has mastered the tone of her show. That's why it's spot on, and she's perfect in this. So when we get a new picture, we have to go, what the heck is the tone here? And sometimes it can fight its own material. Elf was an example where originally the material was more cynical, and it had to be stripped to find the tone that it actually wanted to be at. The longer it takes me to find the tone of a picture, or me and the director together, because this is really the journey we're on, the harder the ride is, because we're just biding time, because we really don't have the experience that people are going to feel while they're watching it figured out at all. We're just telling a story. I mean, I know that's a very nebulous thing, but it's very, very much to the crux of what we do.
For me, I pick pilots every year. I read scripts and then I meet with the people that are making it. So if the people who created it, I sense a passion in them and there's some camaraderie with us, and I love the script and it makes me laugh or feel something, those are the ones I take. The only way that I get involved before cutting it is on pilots, I try to always finagle my way into cutting the screen tests, because then I can influence with my editing the casting.
That's a very true.
Yeah, so like the casting is like the biggest thing in a pilot. If you have a bad cast, like why are you even, you're gonna hate yourself for taking that. So so that's like a trick that I learned along the way.
They always kill at least one actor in a pilot too. They always replace.
Yeah, I'm always very vocal about that, and I manipulate a screen test all day long. Yeah. Sorry, actors.
Me, I have nothing to do with any actors that got cut out of anything. Somebody else's decision.
And I think that it kind of goes to what he said about finding the tone of a picture, because I agree with that you can have a fantastic story, but if you don't feel anything, what's the point? Because I feel like our #1 job is to make people feel something while they're watching a specific story. And for me, it's hard. Like, I would have a hard time doing something like Modern Family, because it's so driven by performances and it's almost 100% dry minus whatever source they use. And I love working with music. However, I never cut with music. Like he was saying, he'll just like lay down a bed. I don't add music until I've cut either an entire act or a reel if I'm doing a film, because I want to get the story working, but then I spend a tremendous amount of time picking the right temp composer if they don't already have a composer on the film, and most of my projects don't have composers until Lock Picture. So I'll go through and I'll just listen to entire scores and say, well, do I want the tone to be Rachel Portman, or do I want it to be Christopher Leonard, or do I want it to be James Horner? Like, I don't know for sure who's right, so I'll just start throwing stuff in there, like which one feels right against picture, but I don't do that until I'm really happy with the scene. Other than that, like sometimes when something just doesn't work, and this is one of my little tricks that I actually picked up when I was a trailer editor years ago, if I can't make a scene work, and don't ask me why, I always use Eminem. And I throw Eminem under a scene and it never works, but you're always like, that was cool, I'm gonna try to do that. It's the weirdest thing, but something always clicks in my brain. Like, what I would do with a trailer is I would assemble all the pieces together. I'm like, I don't know how to score this, and I would just put in Lose Yourself. And it was like, it works with everything. It's perfect. And obviously, it didn't make any sense with what I was doing, but at the end of the day, it always inspired me because I saw 2 images that went together, and the music beat hit on some action. I'm like, that's the moment that I want to build my music around. So it's like a really bizarre trick that I've used for years, but
it may not work for anyone else.
It may never work for anybody but me, but Eminem's Lose Yourself. I always have it in a bin somewhere. It doesn't matter what I'm working on, Eminem.
I temped Beastie Boys through all of Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
Yeah.
So it's like, we're in Brooklyn, and I got really excited about it. And then the composer ended up knocking off like 3 Beastie Boys songs.
Nice.
So that kind of worked.
Do you have any advice for those of us who are trying to get ourselves established today with social media and YouTube? There's so many people out there. Is there anything you would recommend to help set yourself apart from the rest of the pack?
Come to this stuff and meet people.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There's no better way. Like, you can have the best stuff on YouTube on the planet. If you don't have the right people to look at it, pointless. Like, perfect example. My assistant on the project I'm working on right now is here. And you know where I met her? At Lassie Pug 2 months ago, because she came up front and she stood up and said, hi, I'm an assistant editor and I'm looking for work and these are my interests, blah, 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 blah. I met her during the break and she's working for me right now. Come to this stuff and meet people and talk to them. That's how you do it. Or when I came out here, I knew 0 people, but I got out and I met people, because as these guys will attest to, the only way you get jobs is other people that refer you to give you jobs. You don't go on to monster.com and find a job on Modern Family. It doesn't work. So it's all about.
That's how I got my job.
Is it really? Okay, then never mind. Actually,
no.
I got my job on Burn Notice off Facebook, so I'm a total bullshitter. But yeah, you have to know the right people, and they have to look at your work, and they're the ones that are going to help you through. So meet people. What you're doing right now is what you need to be doing. So.
Well, mine is, I mean, are you trying to be an editor?
Actually, I'm trying to be a producer.
Oh. You don't actually need any qualifications for that. That's an entry-level job.
You already are a producer. We'll call him a producer.
Yeah.
You're a producer.
Yeah, well, the great thing about a producer is you don't even have to have produced to be able to call yourself a producer. Yeah, true entry level.
I was working on something recently, and I had one of those, actually I was walking down the street, and a solution to a problem that I wasn't thinking about at the time just happened to pop up, which made a scene work that I had been struggling with. And a quick yes or no answer, have you all had those experiences?
Yeah.
Okay. What can we do to create that type of environment that leads to more of that? What are your tricks for that?
I think stepping away and going for a walk is a really good start. Like if you get too wrapped up in a problem, go work on something else for a little while, or take a break if you have the opportunity or something. Like if you get too focused on one little thing, I don't think that's good for anybody.
I mean, those things are the essence of why something is good. Those ideas, the one thing that hurts them is when you're in a forced pace, if you're rushing. If that's the thing where you can get the work done, but it doesn't afford you the ability to take the breath and then have this off-the-wall little idea that becomes the crux of everything. I mean, you know, we're in the business of problem solving, actually, and what we're really saying is that, you know, sometimes the solution is outside the box, and then you have to go, well, this might be a little odd. What if I steal this and put this here, something like that?
Sleep deprivation is great too, I think.
I use
sometimes at 3
marijuana
o'clock
as
in the
well.
morning. Yeah.
Marijuana, okay, very good.
What I said before, I would just say if you believe in the process, that's a big help.
Well, my Muse, most people wouldn't subscribe to because it's extreme exercise and doing like obstacle course running and
Okay,
like.
you lost me.
Yeah, exactly. That's my Muse. But the reason I do it is because after you do it, everything else kind of seems easier. So, but I don't recommend it for anybody, just for liability purposes. Because if they die and say they learned about it at a panel, that it can come from me. So.
Well, this panel and this audience has been so great that you've asked and answered all the remaining questions I had. I think this is a great place for us to stop. Let's thank our panelists again, and thank you for attending.
Hey, Dan, why do you have that pad?
Oh, yes.
Wait a second.
Oh, well.
Yes, the shameless.
This thing.
Shameless plug.
Shameless plug.
Shameless plug.
There's a little app out there for editing called Touch Edit that you can actually do great pro editing on the iPad, designed by myself. So check it out. It's called Touch Edit.
Wonderful.